All right, so let's keep going through the tabs and take a look at some more visual settings. We looked at the main tab here. And then I'm just going to go to the image one. And this one actually has the highlights and shadows and saturation and color temperature. If we look at it, it also has an auto contrast, a lot like the auto exposure. And if we do the auto contrast, it also sort of lightens things up and tries to find sort of a mid-ground. And if we do the auto exposure with it, it really bleeds it out, especially based on the lights that we have in there. So what we're going to start with is no auto contrast, and you're going to adjust the highlights and shadows to accommodate what you think works best. So obviously here's the highlights, right? Bringing the highlights up higher. And here are the shadows. So the shadows get darker and lighter, and you can go in and sort of adjust these yourself how you think, works the best. So that gives you a little more creativity and also some more ability to handle the sort of brightness and contrast. The saturation, it's not going to really affect it with white, right? But you can see it's pulling the color temperature. So this is the temperature of the light. So you can see you can adjust the color temperature to be distinct. There is a little return up here if you want to put it back to the default settings, right? These are not default settings. So if I go to 12 there, it's actually going to go to 0, right? So that's the default settings for Enscape. So just make sure that you know that if you reset it from what you set it to, it'll go back to whatever Enscape's default settings are. Now the effects, we are going to turn all of those guys off. We don't want motion blur, lens flare, bloom, like the vignette, you can't even tell here. We can look at that later. Or chrome, we don't want any of that on. And then if I go to the atmosphere, we're also turning our sun brightness off, our night. The shadow sharpness is really, you can come in here and play with it as well. I'm not sure that it's going to make a difference with no sun, right? Here's the artificial light brightness, which is really what we're going to be working with because we're placing artificial lights. And so if you come in and adjust this, you can start to see that that is just adjusting the brightness of the lights that you have placed in the scene, okay? So what we're actually doing is sort of cutting down a lot of the options and giving you sort of control, very specific control over the lights that you place. The ambient brightness here is not going to make a difference without any sunlight, and there is no sunlight in here. The wind and the direction of the wind is not important to us. And so let's go to the sky. The sky is actually really interesting. The default settings you saw the default settings previously is actually typically a clear, right? And so it doesn't have, it's just a white light, a basic white light. But what we're going to use is a skybox, which is actually an HDR file. These are actually HDR images as well. So if I go to urban, you'll see it change a little bit because these are actually images that you can't see. We looked at them a little bit previously when we looked at the default settings. But what we're going to use is a skybox. And so if you click on the skybox, you can go to load skybox from file. And we gave you in the template this brown photo studio, which is actually downloaded from one of the sites on the Enscape assets options. And so I'm just going to click on open. And so you would just go to open and you would navigate to where you save that. So I would recommend saving your files in a place that makes sense in your assignment folder. And I'm just going to go and get this brown 4K. And if we take a look at that guy, it's actually on Polyhaven. And so here it is. It's basically a studio setup where you have different lighting conditions. And so you can download different versions of the HDRIs, and they will give you different light qualities based on the settings of the HDRI. So they have exterior ones and interior ones. The interior ones will probably work a little bit better for us. You can test out some of them and try different ones, and we can have a further discussion with that. But right now you can just use the one that we gave you. Okay, and so let's talk about finally output, right? Oh, finishing up on the HDRI, sorry about that. A couple of other things that you can do. It's actually an image that's basically domed around this, this model. And so you can actually rotate it. And if you rotate it, it will change the lighting quality because it's basically rotating the hotspot around the model. So it's rotating that image and using it as a light source. The other thing is remove the brightest point of sun direction. We want it to remain sort of just a backdrop. And you can normalize the average brightness so it doesn't get real light and real dark. You can try unchecking and rechecking these, but oftentimes the normalize helps, especially if it's not a pure gradient. You could use actually just a white background. The brightness is really what is our ambient light. So we don't have a sun with ambient light, but this actually becomes kind of our ambient light. And the default setting is 2000, so I would start there. And then finally, we'll talk about output in the next video and sort of start working through this stuff.